Let's hope I get it right this time, because I just spent 12 minutes recording this video and then realized my microphone was off. Yay. Anyway, what's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from RetroQ Gaming with the video everyone was waiting for. We're going to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. I've already finished this game, so I can talk about everything in it. There will be massive amount of spoiler talk and spoiler discussion in here, so if you haven't finished it or you're only up to a certain point, get them out of here is all I can say. One other thing I will note is that I am not using the Last of Us Part 2 footage in this because Sony have been known to be very trigger happy in regards to taking down any opinion that they're not very happy about in regards to this game. There's a very big narrative they're trying to push, but, well, I'm not giving them any ammo and how they can abuse DMCA claims and whatnot as well, because, well, that's what they do. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So, real quick, I don't even know why I'm going to bother doing this, but The Last of Us Part 2 just released 2 days ago, and if you're not familiar with what it is, here's what it is. It is the sequel to The Last of Us 1, or just The Last of Us back in 2013, which was considered by many a masterpiece game, and it set a very high benchmark in storytelling and gameplay, world, lore, yada yada yada, etc, etc. And this game took about 6 years of development shortly after the remastered version of the original was launched on PS4 starting in 2014. Now, of course, massive expectations were placed on this game. I myself was hyped for this game, and I went in very hyped for The Last of Us Part 2. I could not wait to see what they did. There was massive amounts of spoilers and leaks and all within about the last maybe 2 months or so. I have managed to avoid pretty much all of them. I've seen one or two small ones that didn't really take any massive amount away for me personally, so I got away lightly and I got away lucky in that regard. Now, of course, we have to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. Before we get on to everything else in this video, like I said, spoilers, relations in regards to like the media, other gamers, the pros and cons of the game and all this stuff as well, I want to open up with, I guess you could call it the conclusion, but I will list off the reasons how I got to this conclusion. We'll break it down and get everything into it now in a moment. So, The Last of Us Part 2. Is it a good game? To give you a relative comparison, The Last of Us Part 1, to me at least anyway, was a fantastic game. It was not a so-called masterpiece, as it may so be called by many people, but it is one of the better games of the PlayStation 3, and it is one of the better games of that era of consoles. Hell, even if you count the remastered version, it's one of the better ones of this generation as well. So, that had very high quality and high expectations in there. So, when you look, also, I will consider it a great game, a fantastic game, but not a masterpiece. Now, The Last of Us Part 2, how does that compare? Is The Last of Us 2 a good game, a great game, a masterpiece, a terrible game, an awful game, somewhere in the middle, an average game, a mediocre game? Well, if you ask me, The Last of Us Part 2 is an absolute disaster. It is a travesty. It shits on the original and everything that it tried to build, the world, the lore, the characters, the storytelling mechanics, hell, even the gameplay, which we'll all get to a little bit down the line from now, is absolutely, basically destroyed by The Last of Us Part 2. It is a bad game. Now, is it the worst game ever? No. Is it the worst sequel ever? No. Is it the worst relative sequel ever? Possibly. What do I mean by relative sequel? Well, when you consider the huge bar and such high quality of the previous game from The Last of Us, and then you consider the massive gulf and disappointment in quality between the first and second game, it is potentially the most disappointing and worst relative sequel ever. And remember, that's set in a world where Resident Evil 6 exists. Now, if you've been paying attention to the media regards to The Last of Us Part 2, you will probably have seen all the images and all the praise and all out there as well, where everything is giving it 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, 98 out of 100, 100 out of 100. But all of this has a very big disconnect. As we all know, the gaming media and the games journalists, which are highly disrespected, considered the enemy of gamers by gamers, and well, they're all out for pushing their agendas and clicks, and let's be real, they're kind of afraid to say no to Naughty Dog and Sony at this point. No one wants to be the media outlet or the person who gives the game a 4 out of 5, or well, a 4 out of 10, or a 5 out of 10, basically anything less than a 9 out of 10, because, well, you would get massive amounts of criticism from everyone, not to mention potentially being blackballed by Sony. And of course, if you're blackballed by Sony, think of all the clicks you would miss in relation to some of their upcoming titles. Imagine all the clicks for, we'll just use these as examples, all the clicks that you generated for The Last of Us Part 2 over the last few years. The next God of War, Ratchet and Clank, you get my point, etc., etc. Horizon 2. All these games, and you're basically blackballed from them. Imagine all of that. No one wants to be that. Now, there's also a couple of other things to note with all this too. Typically, the media has their own agenda to push, and they will completely be disconnected from how gamers feel about the game. And of course, this is another situation. You go anywhere outside of a fanboy echo chamber, you will see this game is getting panned by actual gamers, by people who are playing the game, not by people who are paid to play the game, but by people who are spending their own hard-earned money hoping to enjoy the game and getting fucking shafted for it. Just like myself. How raging do you think I'm feeling that I spent €180 on the big collector's edition? Yeah, I'm not pretty fucking happy about that one. So, some great examples of all of this. This is what I call Metal Gear 5 syndrome, is what's going on at the moment with the media in relation to this game. If you're not familiar with it, it's a term I've been using for years and years and years here, ever since Metal Gear Solid 5 launched. If you read any of the reviews or anything like that for Metal Gear Solid 5, you will see that it's the same thing. Gameplay problems, no variety, crap story, plot holes, problem. They list huge glaring problems that would warrant any other game a 2 out of 10 would never play again. But all of these problems which are all listed in these reviews, they will all say all of these and then followed up by 69 out of 10 Kojima masterpiece. So, you can see why you can't take these people and places seriously. And this is exactly the same way and exactly the same thing that's happening with The Last of Us Part 2. Because if you read any of these reviews and you read all of this stuff, you will see they all pretty much say the same thing. And I will agree to this to an extent, but not the same reason. So the reasons what I'm talking about is when you read all of these Last of Us Part 2 ones, they will all say the same thing. That one thing is that this game is not fun to play. Now, what they're trying to push on you is that this game is not fun to play because of the violence, the gore, the unnecessary immoral choices you may have to make, the ones that should harrow on your soul and make you think twice and see that violence is not the answer and that we're better than this and how bleak the future is. This is all completely bullshit. First off, it's a video game. If you can't make a distinction between reality and a video game, well, you need help and you can't really be trusted to be working in games journalism, which is probably why you're working in games journalism. But clearly, you're pushing an agenda. This is something that the Naughty Dog, the developers, have actually been trying to do. They've been making it so unfun to make you realize the horrors and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, I do agree with all these media outlets that this game is not fun to play, but not for the reasons that they are listing. This game is not fun to play because it is a bad game. The technical limitations, the design limitations, the gameplay, the storytelling, the writing, so much about it, which we'll all get to now in a moment, is absolutely awful in this game. Now, we have some important lies to cover, if you will. So, throughout all of these leaks and throughout everything that had been coming out and all too, and this particular one wasn't even so much part of the leaks that I'm aware of, because like I said, I've avoided pretty much all the major ones. I only saw maybe 2 small leaks that didn't really have much to do with it. But, well, dogs. There are dogs in this game. Now, there are many people out there who dislike killing dogs even in games, or harming animals even in games. So, people were very, very upset about this. Now, The developers came out and said that, oh, don't worry, you can get through the whole game without killing dogs, you don't have to hurt the animals at all, this, that, and the other. This is a complete and utter lie. And just like the whole thing where they try to force you to, see how awful your actions are and feel bad and remorseful for them, you can avoid almost every dog in the game. However, there's a story part where you cannot avoid killing a dog, because it is part of the story. You are forced to do so, or you cannot progress. And then, what do 5 minutes later in the next chapter? They fail, but try to make you feel guilt, remorse, and uncomfortable for killing the dog. Because, from a different perspective, you get to see the dog. It's not a vicious attack dog trying to kill you. It's just a dog wagging its tail, being all happy to see you, and wanting to play fetch. And you can play fetch with the dog. But you see my point. They lied to say about this, and you can say, oh, they just wanted to keep it a secret and keep it a surprise. But the point is, it's still a lie. No Man's Sky, one man's lie. Granted, it's not the same developer, but it's pretty much the same kind of thing. Now, before we go any further and talk about some other problems, we are going to talk about two big technical limitations. Now, one of these we all know was coming, because I'm only going to touch on it because we know it's coming. Frankly, 30 frames per second. It makes the game very difficult to play. It's choppy, it's unresponsive, it's slow, it's sluggish. It's just not suited for it whatsoever. I'm sure the eventual PS5 remaster will bring it to a 60 FPS game, maybe even higher. But after playing The Last of Us Remastered for so long at 60 FPS, and keep in mind I play that game maybe 2 to 3 times a year, it really stood out as such a step back, like pretty much everything else we're going to talk about too. The other one is an FOV, field of view. The FOV in this game is one of the worst I have ever seen. The game and the view is so ridiculously tight that it makes it difficult and awkward to play. And again, it all contributes to being not fun to play. Now, of course, Druckmann and the likes of them are probably up their own arse to the point where they can say it's part of a creative decision or an artistic decision, and they'll probably give some bullshit as well to say, oh, you can just see what Ellie sees, and, she's not aware of her surroundings, and you have to struggle to survive and all as well. I get that they can make up these lies, but I'm too smart for them. At the end of the day, it is one of the worst FOVs I've ever seen in any game. This is the kind of thing that every guy in the world should hope for a girl with a coochie as tight as the FOV in this game. It is literally so bad and unplayable. It's awful in that regard. Now, those are the two technical limitations. We're going to talk about some of the rest of them, like level design and kind of most of the world and all too. When you look at the level design in this game, one of the biggest problems they made was setting almost the entire game into one city. And because of that, what they've done feels, I'm not saying they've done it, but it feels exactly like they're copy and pasting the same 3 or 4 different encounter sections. And just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. Almost every one is so unmemorable and just feels exactly like the same one you've done before. Now, don't get me wrong. In the first The Last of Us game, there was several incidents like that as well. And of course, just like the first one, they can't design something properly so that you can instantly tell when you drop into a new area that it's going to be a battle scene and whatnot too. So this is a continuation of that problem. It's also an expansion of that problem in several ways, because it all comes down to being not fun to play. The design, the city, everything about it, it just does not work well. When you're playing it, it just does not work well. The same way is the variety. Remember I said about 90% of the game, maybe 95% of the game is all into one city. Because of that, it feels like they're just using the same style and the same architecture and whatnot. Rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. At least in The Last of Us 1, there was different cities which used different architecture styles and different layout styles and all as well. Big one that springs to mind is the hotel in the first game. But you compare Pittsburgh to the likes of Boston, you can see notable differences. Whereas this one all just feels like it's the same thing over and over and over. Now, you can argue, okay, that makes sense because it's the same city, but again, it's not fun. It's not enjoyable because of stuff like that. Now, don't even get me started about the writing, or I wish I could say, don't even get me started about the writing, but unfortunately, I have to. Because the writing in this game is absolutely brutal with so many of it. There are so many tropes thrown in there out of nowhere. One of which had someone laughing so hard. Not me, but it had someone I know laughing so hard when he saw it. And that was with the I think I'm pregnant trope. Now, I could see it a mile away because I'd been paying attention to the story and I knew that Dina and Jesse had just broken up fairly recently, within the last, I believe it's a couple of weeks before like when it happened and at that point. And what triggers it and all as well, I'm like, I bet she's pregnant. And then, a little bit later, boom, it's announced. It's kind of easy and trope obvious. There's many of the other ones as well that come into the gameplay much, much later. But this just gives you an idea of how hackneyed the whole thing is. And you will notice it when you get to certain points of the game and it just completely flips it on its head. And they can probably try to say, oh, someone is learning, they're regretting their actions, or they're changing their mind, or something like that. The way they have it done, and the way they have everything written, is so poor. The characters are so one-dimensional, until they're just randomly not. It's really, really, really poor. This especially comes in with what we're going to talk about now in the second half. One thing I forgot to mention just a moment ago when it came to one-dimensional characters and poor writing and whatnot, roughly about 30 minutes, maybe an hour into the start of the game, a significant plot point happens. Joel is killed. That's right, Joel gets his head caved in and right in front of Ellie, which of course sets up the entire game to have the reason why she's doing what she's doing, and basically the reason why the entire game exists. Now, throughout the entire course of the game, this never really wavers, for the most part. There's maybe one or two little bits in there too where it does, but that's where it all completely falls apart, because it never goes away until it's convenient. And that's just it. For example, you get up to the point where you're basically what most people would usually consider is going to be the final fight, and then it just ends. It just goes a completely different way. When I say it ends, the game doesn't end, but it just goes a completely different way. And everything that had been built up from both characters, the main protagonist and the main antagonist, it just completely falls apart. I mean, their whole reasons for being, their whole reasons for the game being what it is, and their parts are just flipped on their head completely and completely discarded. Just like that, at the drop of a hat. It's literally night and day on a split second. It just goes like that, in the middle of the thing. It's ridiculous. They're basically fighting to the death, they're about to kill each other, about to kill friends and stuff like that, and then suddenly, no, I don't want to, we'll change it. Because, I realize I was trying to avoid spoilers, but then I remembered I'm doing a spoiler-filled version of this. Ellie and one of the other characters, the girl that kills Joel, Abby, they finally get to face-to-face. They finally get a fight. They're finally in the what would be the fighting sequence. And of course, in previous chapters and all as well, Ellie has killed many of Abby's friends. They've killed her ex-boyfriend, Owen. They've killed her ex-boyfriend's current girlfriend, who's pregnant, Mel. They've killed her. Of course, Dina, who is Ellie's girlfriend, is pregnant. So Dina tries to save Ellie, and of course, being the hulking behemoth that she is, Abby gets her hands on Dina. She smashes her head into the ground a few times, gets the knife to her neck, and when Ellie says, no, don't do it, she's pregnant, she goes, good, payback is make it just as brutal and all that. And then, just out of nowhere, she just says no and walks off, and that's the end of it. Or, well, you think that's the end of it. Because we mentioned Abby a bunch. And that's where Abby comes in. Abby, of course, is the big bad guy, or the big bad girl. She's the main antagonist. She's the one that caves Joel's head in with a golf club. Now, it sets up the entire game. Naturally, Ellie is pissed. Like, biblical proportions. Quentin Tarantino level film of pissed. So she goes across the country in this world that they live in order to get revenge. She hunts down all her friends to get through all there as well. And then you make it about 50% of the way through the game where they finally come face to face. And the game completely starts over using Abby. You get to spend the 3 previous days that you controlled Ellie for from Abby's point of view. It's so poor. This is done wrong in so many different ways. Mainly because it's not only the game and the gameplay is so unenjoyable. The writing is so bad. The gameplay is so bad. The way they've built up Abby the entire time, completely demonizing her as well, with what they're going to do over these next 3 days and chapters, completely falls flat. They attempt to humanize Abby after building her up so much as the big hateable nemesis, the big bad guy. And you know what? It completely falls apart. Even what way they do it, they've demonized her so bad and built her up so bad that no one cares by the end of it. And they've done it in such a poor way because their character writing and all is so bad that you care zero about Abby. But you care maybe 1% about the characters around her. But not enough for it to affect your view on what Ellie's doing. These are the bad guy's friends, the bad guy's compatriots. Fuck them. That's it. There's no way around it. There is, of course, one extra little positive side about this that we'll talk about now in a moment. Because at the end of the day, it's done something from a narrative point that I have always thought about in comics, in post-apocalyptic TV shows and stuff like that as well. And they've showed it from the other side. Now, when I say they've showed it from the other side, is let's use The Walking Dead. No, let's not even use The Walking Dead. Let's use The Last of Us. When you're following, in the first game, Ellie and Joel, imagine all the other groups that they come up against even. Imagine how crazed and murderous and not so much suicidal, what's the word I'm looking for? Homicidal, that these people come across as. Ellie and Joel, that is. So you're seeing it from the other side. Because I'm sure that when you come up against all these raiders and all these other groups and all as Ellie and Joel, they all seem as homicidal and crazy and lunatics and all to you. And then you seem that same way to them. I mean, there's all the big conversation with the David story when David and Ellie get to talking in the first game. But it really flips it on its head in that way. And I can't even give it full credit because they tried to do that. But the writing, characters, everything is just so poor that it just completely falls flat. But it was nice to see in that regard. But just as a great example, controlling Abby for roughly the same period of time that you've controlled Ellie, it just completely kills the game and drags it on. You think you're up to the end, and in a game that's already dragging, and then you have to redo the same size section again. With the same poor gameplay, the same poor design, the same poor everything. FOV, frame rate, gameplay, narrative, story, writing, design, everything. You have to replay that in the same length. This game took me about 23 hours to finish. I was done at about 12 hours. It was horrible. Absolutely horrible in the latter half. Even towards the end of Ellie's half. I guess you could call it Ellie's first half. Because what happens is you play Ellie's portion up to where they come face to face with Abby. And then you play Abby's portion where you come up face to face with Ellie in that same part. And that's where you progress and you go forward from there. And then, remember when I said that they had the fight and she basically threatens that she's about to kill Dina and then just out of nowhere she decides to just walk and leave? Yeah, then the game skips forward about 9 months. Probably, hell, it's even a little bit more than 9 months. It's probably about a year. And they're living off in some idyllic society where Dina and Ellie and their little baby are just living in peace together. Tommy shows up and he says he's found a way to do vengeance and extract vengeance. And then, of course, the usual happens. she's let it go until she hasn't, and then she goes and eventually finds Abby and all in her, after Abby's basically kidnapped by a group at that point and left for dead. And of course, you're still pissed. You go, you find her, you cut her down from being crucified, literally being crucified. And well, then Abby just decides to be like, yeah, okay, see you later, bye. And then Ellie's having none of it. And they decide, well, Ellie forces her to have a fight. Presumably a fight to the death. And it gets to the point where Ellie basically has won. She's in the sea. She's holding Abby down under the water. She's coughing and spluttering around. She's about to drown. And just like that, the shitty writing, the shitty characters, the shitty everything kicks into overdrive once again, flips around 100% on a 180. She just lets her go and just says, bye, see you later. That's it. It's over. That's it. Then, of course, Ellie goes home. Dina's left, as she threatened to do, because, you know, Ellie leaving and all. And, yeah, Ellie's basically completely fucked. She got 2 fingers bitten off during the final fight. She can't play the guitar properly. She tries, but, you know, you're missing fingers. It's a bit difficult. And, yeah, it ends on a bit of a sour note. Now, I'm not adverse to a game finishing on a sour note, because, well, that can be done right. But with just how poor everything in this one was, really, really, I won't say upsets me, because that implies I care more than I do. Q, you're making a 20-minute video about this. Clearly you care. Yeah, sure, I care. I'm not going to get upset about it, though, but I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that this game was shite. I'm disappointed that this game will be said and remembered in the same vein as the first game, which is going to shit all over the previous game's legacy. It's such a disappointment in basically every conceivable way. I'm so unhappy about it. It's fucking ridiculous.